Well, good morning, everybody. Almost afternoon in some places. If you're on the West Coast, it's still early morning in a couple of ways. But Terry Francis and I are going to be sitting down and discussing the work of an evangelist again. Hopefully, there'll be others who will come in with some really great for our time. In this conversation is going to be what about evangelism? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the practical sides of working in an effective and an efficient way to share the gospel. And so Terry will have to figure out whatever's going on with the sound. Terry, can you hear us there? I think he is figuring all that out. He may have to click a few buttons and get a few things worked out just right for a second. But he'll join us. We're going to take time in this conversation to introduce the subject. We are certainly not going to be able to cover everything by any means. There's going to be some aspects of it that we'll have to gradually work through. And some of that is going to be pretty easy for us to lay out, but we've got it broken down into a couple of areas. Basically, in a simple sense, finding prospects, teaching prospects, and then retaining them or keeping them connected to the body of believers together. And in that process, hopefully we're going to be able to then provide some insight in some practical areas, things that are functional and successful, things that will hopefully allow us to share the gospel to a greater degree of practical success. Terry, is your audio coming through again there? I'll tell you, maybe you can hear me when I come on again. Whatever you did last week to fix it is what you need to do this week. And so I'm not sure whatever it is that happened with your connection the last week, but do it again this time. I think it may be some level of strangeness there. But as he starts figuring that stuff out, you can see his frustrated face, and maybe that's his happy face. We're not sure which one of those two that it is. Let me just introduce a couple of ideas of things that are important to think about fundamentally from the get-go. Terry, you there yet? Maybe try doing it without the headphones again. But a couple things are really important. First and foremost, the outcome you're looking for is not whether or not a person individually makes the decision to committedly follow after Christ. You have very little control over that in a large sense. And in fact, you have almost no control over it. The second thing to recognize is that success is not defined on whether or not they themselves are baptized. Hey, there he kind of is. I heard noise. Hey, Terry. Oh, I can hear you
Can
better
you hear me?
than a Verizon commercial. So yeah, that's good.
Good.
So anyway, I was just letting everyone know kind of our topics, and I kind of laid out a couple of box-in things. That number one, success is not defined by the number of people who commit themselves to follow Christ. And secondly, success is not defined by their presence in a baptistry. Those are amazing
Correct.
things in and of themselves, but those are really outside the scope of our ability to directly control or influence. And so we're really just talking about some practical tips that are successful, that are effective in finding, teaching, and keeping prospects. And so I think right now we can, from the springboard of the Gospel of Luke chapter 8, verse 4, where we are reminded in Jesus' teaching that the sower goes forth to sow, let's spend a few minutes talking about sowing the seed and doing so effectively. So Terry, what are some things in your individual experience that have been effective in finding prospects? Like if you could lay it down, these are the things that work.
So first off, I think there's a couple different ways to approach that. One of those is the cold call versus the warm call. It's an oddity that when it comes to evangelism, we prefer a cold call over a warm call because there's no risk. So let me say that the greatest thing you can do to teach the gospel to people is teach the people you already know who don't have the gospel. Now, the reason you don't do that is because you're afraid that you're going to lose that person as a friend, or you're going to create some conflict with them if they're a family member or a coworker. It's odd that in every other part of our life, we understand that. And let me illustrate this way. Fundraising, when it comes time to raise money for your kid's school, what do? You typically, or if it's Phil selling the popcorn for the Boy Scouts.
That sounds horrible.
Okay, let's pick on Phil. Because let's be honest, I can get popcorn anywhere. And as much as the Boy Scouts try to tell me that that's special popcorn, it ain't special. It's just popcorn. Why do I buy popcorn from Boy Scouts? Because I know the Boy Scout that asked me to buy popcorn. Because I can get it cheaper at the store. And Phil's going to send his boys out to the people that they know to sell popcorn. It's just more success that way. Wrapping paper. Have you ever bought wrapping paper for a school fundraiser that you didn't even need? Why did you buy it?
Yeah, I'll make one string, and this practice says that's Girl Scout cookies, that's sports bouquets, that's ferns, that's all of that. You're supporting the person.
Cutco knives. I have a set of Cutco knives because of Matt Buffet. I love them, but I would have never bought them.
And so it's not about the item, it's about the relationship. And I'll make one thing in this definition between cold call and warm call, and where I place these things. If somebody you don't know has already made it to the point that they come to your services, they are effectively so bought into the idea of hearing the gospel that they are about as warm as you're going to get. You don't get more warm than someone coming to the service, even if they're not one of your friends.
Yes.
Because think about how many barriers they may have had to go over to get there, to get to like, I'll come to that church today. I'll show up at services. If you don't follow up on those calls, you're missing out on one of the healthiest areas to share the gospel. And I put them in the warm call side.
There's a lot so in the evangelistic community and the guys that do this, there's a great debate about this, by the way. Guest evangelism, which is where we essentially use those people who visit us, we retain them as guests, is often looked down upon by some evangelists as this negative thing. The problem with that is, let me illustrate this way. There's this thought of, and I've done this. I mean, I've gone and still do. I'll go to the coffee shop and I'll sit and study at the coffee shop where my Bible's out. People can come ask me questions. And that happens at times. I've done, basically meet up before there was meet up, get together, we'll study. We've done singings on the square in the town that we've lived in to try to generate people to walk by. But all of those things, I've knocked on doors. All of those things are cold call. There is no risk, but there is nothing that person invested into you or the gospel. So the idea that you're better off to do this coffee shop evangelism, that's better evangelism than the 20 people who walked into your building this week and aren't Christians or aren't members of your congregation, then following up with them is insane, because these people have already basically said, I want to know about it.
The interest plane that they're on of like, how important is this relationship or information to me is they've already climbed part of the mountain. They're not all the way there to the top, but they've made some journeying steps. And that's in part why the public message that comes from the pulpit, from the Bible class, has a significant part of the process. Like, it can't be pushed off to the side. It's part of evangelism. It is not like, this is one like I get frustrated when someone will say, well, gospel preaching, you're just edifying the saints. I'm like, no, I am not. Even if my message is honed for adults, and it usually is in the assembly, I'm not just edifying saints. It is edification for sure, but it's also evangelism. Because if I give a good message in the class or in the pulpit, and you go home and say, I want my neighbor to hear his next message, then that's evangelism in the simplest, most effective sense. And it is probably going to get results in areas that I haven't even thought about, but I didn't intend for this sermon to have a resultant outcome. Well, I was preaching on this, and boom, here's some seed on the wayside that came up that I didn't plan for. I think you're going to see a great part of that too.
Right.
And for me, there's no debate there.
Yeah. The other thing is, yeah, you might even say, so the question may be, well, how do we get visitors? Like that's sometimes what I get asked. How do you get visitors? And I can tell you, every group I've been a part of, we have eventually got our visitor flow up to probably around 20 consistently. And the key to that is, sometimes, I know there's been one or two places before we did that, we had to actually fix some things internally. And what I mean by that is, the best way to get visitors is to get your own members excited about worship and about the church. And that includes preachers you're in preaching. That includes the Bible class teachers teaching great Bible classes. That includes developing great relationships that are open, that are sometimes vulnerable, that are always honest. That includes liking each other. You get Christians liking where they go to church, liking the message, enjoying the worship, enjoying their Bible class. They start telling other people about it. People start wanting to come and see, in the words of Phillip to Nathaniel. And when that happens, then you start building a relationship. People will come and see and find out, yeah, this is actually what they're talking about. So part of that is, if you're the right group to begin with, that will breed excitement. And evangelism breeds excitement. I tell you, there's nothing that breeds more visitor flow and excitement among your members.
Right. Here's something I think, this is my perspective on why I enjoy the coffee shop, the Panera Bread type studies. It's not because it's a cold call plethora where I can just have so many great contacts and people are just falling over the table to come and study with us. It's not that at all. And in fact, it's a hit or miss thing there. Sometimes I go out to the studies and it's me studying, like literally me just sitting down and preparing for my next class. But I've noticed that there is an enthusiasm bump. And the bump isn't necessarily with those who may come as Christians already with me to those studies. It's those people who were at the study go and do something amazing in another place. And it may have nothing to do with what we studied. It may have zero to do with my intended equipping that I was trying to give them, but it has everything to do with they're now being encouraged to see, hey, we can do it there. I can go do them here. And then you have the final turn of the key where that excited person teaches the gospel to somebody else, and someone who wasn't at the study with us at the coffee shop didn't know about that, but sees that new conversion, and they go, oh, I can do it too. You got this contrast, and we'll probably talk about it right now, of front door, back door entrance points. And we've been talking a lot about the front door side, where someone just comes into the building. But both of them are ways where you can find prospects. And I'll add one more thing. If you meet someone in your congregation who is really good at the front door or the back door side of things, invest in them, equip them, both from a institutional, structural side of the congregation, like elders, financial, emotional support, whatever, but also individually invest yourself in them. If they're good at it, let them be good at it, and then encourage them to be great. And then you can keep doing what you're good at. And now you've gone from one guy doing his best to 2, to 4, to 8. It's a powerful shift if you can accept that, hey, they can do it, it's good. And they won't do it like I do. And that's okay too.
Yeah, on the backdoor side, you know, what it requires of you to do a backdoor evangelism is to really be in your community, get to know people. Some of the best backdoor evangelistic opportunities I've ever had were neighborhood studies, where somebody from church would just invite their neighbors to a Bible study on a regular basis. And we would go over one night a week, or maybe every other week. We'd sit in their living room, all of us, and study together. We baptized a whole family that never had set foot in the church building that way. There's a lot of opportunities like that out there. I always think about when you read through Acts, the majority of evangelism you see was really what we would classify as backdoor evangelism. I mean, there's a mixture. But what I mean by that is a lot of it that's just them talking to people about Jesus as they go through everyday life. It's not this formal approach we often make it. And backdoor evangelism is really just incorporating talking about the gospel into your everyday life with people you're around in a variety of circumstances, whether that's practice, whether that's at a restaurant. I will tell you, I think there's always a fine line in how you do that. I'm not the kind of guy that jumps out at the first person and goes, "Hey, do you know Jesus?" I think there's a little bit more wisdom in how you approach that, but you also have to have your eyes open to see the opportunities
and be prepared for them. And that's a preacher responsibility thing to a certain degree. That this is something preachers need to be doing. We need to be equipping our members to be prepared to take advantage of it in simple, successful ways, because they're an everyday thing. If we're open to the idea, and I'll kind of include this. If you're talking about building a healthy flock, you need to be honest about one aspect of it that's really important. There are congregations that are kind of close together at times, physically. And Terry and I have opinions as to the value of whether that's a healthy thing or not. I'll just tell you straight up, to me, there are far too many congregations far too close together in proximity to one another, and it's not healthy. Evangelism, and straight up, is not just reaching out to those who have not heard Christ before. It includes, to me, reaching out those who have heard Christ but have lost their first love. And maybe they're in a congregation where their faith is dying, and they look over and they go, "You know what? If I stay where I'm at, I'm going to die too. But if I go over there, I'll live again. And maybe we should all go over there." To me, and Terry can disagree, and y'all can disagree with me if you're watching it. It doesn't matter. But to me, that's evangelism. There's no difference between reaching out to the brokenhearted who fell away or who is falling away than it is the one who has not yet known Christ. I think they're all in the same basket, and they're all prospects. It's not sheep stealing.
Well, and restoration is part of evangelism too. Those members who have fallen away, if you can find them. And I'll also add to that, there are people that we have in the past evangelized who are in places that we agree with a lot of things, but we disagree in a lot of things. And if I am convicted in those situations that they are indeed a danger to their soul, then that becomes evangelism as well. And that's a sticky wicket, but it's also something that's not sheep stealing either. I don't like sheep stealing. That's not what we're talking about here. In fact, I'm the guy that if I know, and there's preachers who I've had these conversations with, where a member is visiting from another place, I'll call that evangelist or an elder and say, "Hey, just want you to know so-and-so is here. I don't know what the story is. I'm not pursuing them." And usually I'll find out what the story is, because they'll be like, well, and a lot of times what they'll say is they probably need to be with you guys. And, but we're talking about something completely different. So cold call versus warm call, front door versus back door. I guess the question everybody asks besides that, because you got to find prospects, you got to identify prospects. One of the things we do, and we could talk about this for a long time, we track our guests here. If you visit with us at Chelsea and you're a local visitor, your name goes on a physical database, but it also goes on a physical piece of paper that I have a team of 4 guys that we keep your name in our pocket for 6 weeks after your last visit, anticipating your return. And that name and some few details about you and your family helps us to re-greet you every time you're there, call your kids by name, remember a few things about you, and also keeps your name at the top of our list. That's a very systematic way of us trying to track you and take you from being a prospect or into an actual teaching opportunity. Now the question becomes, when that changes from a prospect into a teaching opportunity, how do we do that? And that's probably what people think that evangelism is all about, and what's the secret
Right.
sauce to teaching and converting people. So here's the secret sauce to teaching and converting people to evangelism. And if you're out there, write this down.
Yeah.
There is no secret sauce.
Uh,
And what I mean by that is we get too caught up into this is the only way to do evangelism. No, really, if there's a secret sauce, it's just teach Jesus. It's share Jesus. I mean, you look at Acts 8, that's what Phillip did with the eunuch. That can be done in a lot of different ways. And based on who I'm studying with and based on their background, that has to be done in a lot of different ways. I cannot teach somebody who's never been in a building, never, ever been exposed to worship or God the same way that I teach somebody who's been in their minds, a believing Christian for years in a different denomination. I have to teach those two people two different ways. Can't give them the same workbook.
Yeah.
Can't give them the same lesson.
Right.
Doesn't work that way.
The goal, and we talk about like, guests. I've kind of adopted from new to family. New to family is kind of the way that I would describe. We're trying to take them someone we just met. They're new. We want them to be family in Christ, family in God, family in shared understanding of whom we are. There's no linear model, but every 2 years, 3 years, someone writes a book, comes out with a new video, a new system, and says, this is it. From Jewel Miller to Ken Welliver. I think it's Ken Welliver who has that's the one who has the book, the overall plan of God, or there's a packet, big picture of the Bible. That was the most recent, like, new hit, one hit wonder. Both of them are all, I'll even say Jewel Miller is great. Yeah. Film strips probably are retro cool. If you're a millennial, get a film strip, get those old Jewel Millers out. I'm telling you, the millennials will probably love it. The hipsters, they'd be like, oh man, this is the best stuff ever because it's old.
And a record,
right.
Get it with the
record player and a true film strip projector where you got to work it by hand.
Yeah, absolutely. The problem is that takes 6
right.
weeks. That's the one drawback, is that Jewel Miller is a 6-week process. And that's where you lose the millennials.
Millennials,
really
cool the millennial hipsters would be in. Millennial hipsters, they'd be in. They'd buy in.
Yeah.
But again, none of these things are so magical and so amazing and so revolutionary that no one's thought about before, because they're essentially all the same. When you get down to it, you pull off the branding, the wrappers. They're the gospel in a format. The gospel with structure. And so keep it simple. Sit down and talk to someone. My methodology is what I've kind of leaned into is the Pauline perspective, in that every time Paul preaches, he tells about his conversion, whom he was, what he was doing, and why he followed. So my short conversations, I talk about Paul, who he was, what he did, why he follows, and then I talk about me, who I was, why I follow, and what I'm doing. It's not complicated. It allows me two great successes, because I think I really know my Bible, and I probably really know myself. And so I don't struggle at that point anymore. There's no fear of like, what am I going to say? Well, if I don't know, I don't know. And so I think, that principle for me allows me to be authentic and genuine.
Well, and what you're doing there is what the denominational world calls witnessing, which we have
testify.
Kind of looked down upon that phraseology. Yeah, testimony. Give your testimony or witness, but there's some real credibility to that. I will tell you that the other thing you need to know about successfully teaching somebody, besides keeping it simple and realizing you have to tailor make that message to each person in a way, is that the single greatest factor, I think, besides the message of the gospel is timing. You have to be careful. I think there's been times where I've tried to rush somebody too quickly, and there have been times where I have taken too long. And what that means is that each case, the timing is also very subjective to the person. You can only determine that, by the way, by getting to actually know the person. And which also means what you're doing is you're taking this prospect And essentially, you're developing a relationship as quickly as possible to change them into the warmest call possible. And if you do that, then you have the most influence into being able
Let
to
me add
teach
this little
them.
tidbit. Terry and I are attaching structural terms so that we can kind of break down the process. The terms themselves are not really the issue. When we talk about warm, cold, all that stuff, we're not selling a product, but we're using these terms so that we can have the pieces of the puzzle layout in a sensible way. Because more practically, on the big sense, we're opening our heart, we're welcoming them in. They say, this is who we are. Let us be part of your life, so because we want to help you. And folks who are looking at this and thinking through, you know, some of this seems so different than what I've done before. Cool. If it's different than what you've done before, give it a try. If you've been doing this and it's not working, do it in a different spot or do it in a different way. I firmly believe that one of the lies preachers tell themselves so that they can sleep at night is the ground is too hard here. Oh, the ground's just so hard here. No one's.
Yeah.
It lets you go to sleep at night. I think Terry and I probably have said that to ourselves at times of frustration, but it's not really true. The ground is the ground. The hearts are the hearts. The gospel is the gospel. It pierces through at the same rate that God wants it to anywhere. And when we're not satisfied with what God has given to us, we complain about it. When maybe we didn't realize and acknowledge that, hey, he gave us what we could handle. And maybe our ego says we can handle everything, but reality tells us, hey, you know what? You're not ready to teach 150 people right now. You don't have the skills.
Well, and the other thing is, you said the ground is too hard. We've said that before, but it's interesting that in the parable of the sower, Jesus did not say to avoid the hard ground. And it goes back to what successful evangelism is. If the ground is too hard, you keep sowing the seed and hope that it's going to find that one small pocket of good soil within the hard ground. You don't stop farming. You don't stop sowing the seed. And that's the key. And I know at time, I will say there's a lot of factors, I think, that get involved in how the ground is. And what I mean by that, and it's more for the evangelist that moves than the person who's in the community. Let me say that. But for the evangelist who moves, I have found that an urban area evangelizes different than a rural area. You're going to find out that evangelism is different in geographic regions. And that sounds weird. But all of that is stuff that you will figure out as if you keep sowing the seed. If you just sit back and go, this is too hard, and quit, you'll never figure it out, and you'll never save anybody, and you are failing. You are failing to do what you should do. Additionally, let me say that the third step of this process, because I know we're running close on time, is how to keep the prospect who's now hopefully converted becomes a disciple. That's the role. Evangelism is making disciples. So how do we retain them? Retention of disciples, new disciples, I think may be the single greatest failure of the modern church. Part of that is because we rush people to the baptistry. We think the process is over once they raise up out of the water, when in actuality, the process has really just begun. But Matthew 28:18-20, the making of disciples was two steps. The first step, which is really the beginning, was baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. The second step, which is the hardest part of the work, and the real work, is teaching them to observe all the things that I've commanded you. And so when we talk about keeping the new disciple, what we're really talking about is how do we retain them? What does that look like? Now, I will tell you at Chelsea, we have a 4-step process we call the heart of discipleship. It's even reflected in our logo, where our 4 areas of emphasis as we try to grow disciples is we want them to experience and to understand worship. We want them to understand learning, which is our Bible classes. We want them to learn how to care for one another, have that fellowship through our fellowship, specifically through our small groups activities. And then we want to teach them how to teach, like 2 Timothy 2:2 says, which is evangelism. And we want to grow them in those 4 areas and take them systematically in those areas of growth. How do we do that? Well, I think, and you and I talked about this earlier, I'm just, and lately this has been kind of my soapbox, so I apologize, don't apologize. I think along with this retention focus on relationships enough, I will tell you, I found in my evangelism, the greatest success we have, you feel like they belong to the family of God the quickest. And they actually have people who love them, and they actually feel like they're a part of the family, the flock, the church. It's relationships. How can you do that? I think the greatest way to do that is not through a foundations class where you isolate them in a classroom for a year during your Bible classes and they don't get to know people. I know we've done that. I don't know that that's successful. What our plan is here is that with new converts, we will take them through a systematic study, 6 to 8 lessons. We've not determined that fully yet, so it's in process. But we will have 6 to 8 families whose job is to teach that exact study. So let's say Phil would teach lesson 1, I would teach lesson 2. There'd be other people. When that happens, Phil would have those new converts, that family, into his home. He would feed them. They would spend time together. They would spend 30 to 45 minutes going over this lesson. And they would do that. And Phil would do that with every new convert doing lesson 1. Now, the side part of that is eventually what we're going to have Phil do is we're going to have Phil bring another family in addition to the new convert, who Phil's going to mentor to teach lesson 1. And in a year, we're going to have 2 families that teach lesson 1. Now we're growing disciples. And it may be some of the very people we've converted by teaching them. So we're teaching them and we're growing relationships. They belong. They have a purpose. And that's going to make them stable.
One thing I want to add to this, and I think this is really powerful, especially, and I'll be point blank here. This is not just for the preacher. I'm talking to those who might be shepherds, pastors, bishops, overseers, elders, pick a term, roll with it, don't care. I'm talking to members, talking to Christians as a group. Evangelism is teamwork, period. That's a full stop. If you think your congregation is going to grow by changing your preacher, like literally changing one preacher to another preacher, not going to happen. If you think it's going to grow because you take your current preacher and you add a second preacher, any second preacher, not going to happen. 2, 3, 4, 5 guys, doesn't matter. It's a congregational environment. And especially in moving down in here to Georgia, from Tennessee, I have learned that in a very principled way, that there are members here who can reach people that I will never touch in my life. And so my goal, my role is to make them equipped to do it better, because they were doing it before I got here. If the Lord wills, they'll do it if they're outside of my influence sphere. So I've got to help be a part of it. The congregation has to do that. And elders, if you're listening, if you're in that role, grab the throttle, get a hold of the steering wheel, and help the congregation go that way. Because here's a simple way to think about it. If the flock you're shepherding is looking at the other sheep all the time, and they're not looking at Jesus or the fields, then they be about the scriptures and know every word. Right? On top of the soapbox there for a minute.
I don't know if it's me
or
you are having connection issues.
Eventually, it'll probably work itself out. But I was just getting the soapbox and just laying it down. That like this is a group effort, and we all need to get on it. And if your congregation is staring at each other and looking at each other all the time and seeing all the warts and wrinkles on their faces and not looking outward and not looking to Jesus, your church is dying, and your Christians, your brethren, your sheep are dying.
Yes.
And now I'm back off the soapbox for a second.
Absolutely. Well, we both did a little soapbox standing.
I usually don't need a soapbox. Probably could sit down to speak up. Yeah. Let me just add one more.
I will tell you this. I think one of the things let me say this. I think one of the things that we need to do in the church is we need to be more positive about evangelism. We need to stop having a defeatist attitude. Jason Longstreth, when he did his whatever you call the last paper for his doctorate, did it on evangelism, and found out as he interviewed a number of churches, it was a fantastic study, that there's just an overall defeatist attitude among churches of Christ in regards to evangelism. That there's this feeling that nothing works and that we don't know what we're doing. One elder said we need more success stories in those interviews. This is something that I think is got to be talked about more positively than we do. We have to talk about how it is possible, and we need to make it something that people feel is possible, not something that we think is kind of difficult. And so if we enter this idea into a defeatist attitude, we need to kind of change that and continue moving forward.
And Terry, your process there, you talked before about how a family would teach that first foundation study to the new believer, and then eventually a new family would come in and be mentored, and they would start taking up that task too. I think it's important that just as you welcome someone new to family, that the family member, the new family member, has a reason to be there. You've got to give them an understandable, hey, I'm here because I'm valued. I'm here because I provide. Even if it's as narrowly focused as you provide encouragement to me. And that's maybe me as a preacher going and saying, hey, I'm glad you were here today. I'm so thankful you were paying attention. When I was preaching up there, did I say something you didn't understand? Did I miss something? Did you notice something in the text that I missed? Building that relationship is really powerful and makes someone feel like, hey, cares, because you do. We don't always display our care very well. Sometimes we're kind of monolithic, especially preachers, because our brain is empty after we've preached. But eventually we need to get beyond that and kind of, participate in the same ways as we're asking others to do in those assemblies. So
absolutely. I know we're out of time. Just say to those who may struggle with this, it can be done. It can be done. But you have to keep a positive attitude to be successful in this area.
So let me close off with this today. One, if you feel like you're not as successful as you would like to be in this area, or you just want to get better than whatever it is, start by praying, and then be reasonable. Reach out to those who you think are successful and make the triad of success come to play. Humble, hungry, and smart. Be humble, be hungry, and be smart by asking someone who does it well, say, what are you doing? Show me what you're doing so I can do that. And if you need encouragement, Terry and I are happy to listen and to be sounding boards, but go to your elders, talk to them openly about it. Go to your fellow brethren who worship with you and say, hey, look, I want us to be better about this, and I want to be part of making it better. What can we do to make it better? How can I help the congregation I'm part of move off of the we're going to go extinct list to we're thriving, which is a conversation Terry and I will have in the future about, at what point do congregations recognize that they're dying? And do they actually know?
Yeah. Let me say this too to the elders. If you want evangelism to be successful, you have to be involved in this as well. Even if it's just making sure that there's opportunities, or asking your evangelist to equip rather than to do all the work. But I think elders, should be active evangelists as well. We're to follow their example, and a church will follow your example. And so if all the elders are doing is just maintaining the church, then that's all the church is going to do. But if the elders are trying to grow and help the church thrive, that's what will happen. We have this mentality in the area of not just evangelism, but almost everything, that the success of the church depends on the preacher, when the reality is it really depends on the elders and the model that they set. And I think that's just important for people to understand.
I'll stretch a little bit more. It is often said that you are the average of the people you hang out with. That's a kind of a truism. Churches are the average of their leadership. That's the preacher, the elder, the deacons, the mature members of the flock. Leadership charts the destiny. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? But it requires the entire ensemble to make the journey possible. And so leadership can go a long way to actually getting people to lead beyond their current setting. Like elders could be here, but they're able to lead someone to be there. The internet seems to be fighting us today. So we're going to go ahead and think that's a good sign for us to back off and let the widgets of the gnomes and such of the internet to fix their problems for another day. I want to thank everyone for joining in with us. Thank Terry for participating in these ongoing conversations. We always start the conversation with what do we want to talk about, and neither of us go, well, I don't know. And then we kind of look at the final bit of information and go, this is what we really need to talk about today. If you've got suggestions and you've got ideas, some of these ideas come from you. So send them to us. We'd be happy to look at some things. We've got some more stuff coming up ahead that we'll be scheduling soon, and look forward for you to join all of us in that ongoing experiment. Terry, last word?
Thanks for watching. Look
Bye,
forward to next
everybody.
week.